What if the very ground beneath your feet is quietly preparing to betray you? As you watch this, silent pressures are building miles below the surface, locking massive tectonic plates into a deadly grip that must eventually break. If you want to understand these hidden forces and protect your family from what is coming, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with those you care about right now. To truly understand why the Earth is behaving this way, we have to look closely at what happened on June 24th, 2026. On that day, the nation of Venezuela was hit by a seismic disaster unlike anything it had experienced in over a century. It was a terrifying reminder of how vulnerable our modern world can be when the ground decides to move. The country was shaken by a sequence of earthquakes that scientists are still studying with deep concern. This was not a single isolated tremor that passed in a few seconds. Instead, it was a rapid double punch from the Earth that left millions of people in absolute terror. Two major earthquakes struck the region within just 39 seconds of each other. Think about how short 39 seconds really is. It is barely enough time to realize what is happening. It is not even enough time to run down a flight of stairs or find a safe place to hide under a sturdy table. In that tiny window of time, the ground twisted and ruptured twice, creating a catastrophic situation that overwhelmed the entire region. The first of these back-to-back earthquakes came in with a magnitude of 7.2. Just as people were trying to comprehend the violent shaking, the second and even more powerful shock hit, measuring 7.5 on the magnitude scale. Both of these massive events had epicenters located in the Yaracuy region of northwestern Venezuela. This is an area near the town of Umari, sitting just west of the state capital of San Felipe. When scientists at the United States Geological Survey began analyzing the data, they discovered that both of these events were strike-slip earthquakes. This means that the ground on either side of the fault line did not push upward or slide downward. Instead, the two sides of the fault ground horizontally past each other. Imagine trying to slide two heavy, rough concrete blocks past one another while pressing them together with immense force. They will stick, bend, and then suddenly snap forward. That is exactly what happened deep beneath the Yaracuy region. Some geophysicists who have studied the seismic wave patterns suggest that the energy release was so complex and occurred so close together in time that it could actually be described as a single massive rupture event. This complex rupture reached an effective magnitude of 7.8, unleashing an unimaginable amount of energy directly into the surrounding land. To understand why these numbers translate into such a historic catastrophe, we have to look at the physics of how seismic energy travels. A lot of people see a magnitude number on a news report and think it is just a simple statistic. But there are two factors that determine whether an earthquake is a minor warning or a major disaster. The first factor is depth. The earthquakes in Venezuela were dangerously shallow, occurring at a depth of only about 10 kilometers beneath the surface. When a fault ruptures deep inside the Earth, perhaps 100 kilometers or more down, the seismic waves have to travel through a vast amount of solid rock to reach the surface. As they travel, the rock absorbs a large portion of the energy, acting like a giant geological cushion. By the time the shaking reaches the surface, much of its violent force has been lost. But when a rupture happens at a shallow depth of 10 kilometers, there is almost no cushion at all. Virtually the entire force of the energy release hits the surface with its full destructive power. The buildings, roads, and homes sitting directly above the epicenter take the direct impact of the shock waves. The second factor is the quality of what human beings have built on top of that shaking ground. Venezuela has been trapped in a severe decade-long economic crisis. Because of this, resources have been incredibly scarce, and infrastructure maintenance has been almost non-existent. In the densely populated, low-income neighborhoods, construction standards have not been enforced for years. Hundreds of thousands of families live in homes built of unreinforced brick and concrete blocks. These structures are heavy, rigid, and completely brittle. They were never engineered to bend, flex, or absorb the violent horizontal movements of a strike-slip earthquake. When the ground lurched violently twice in less than a minute, these brittle buildings could not handle the stress. They did not sway, they simply shattered and collapsed. In the coastal state of La Guaira, which sits directly above the active rupture zone, the destruction was nearly total. Initial reports from the ground indicated that up to 80% of the buildings in some neighborhoods had completely collapsed, burying entire streets under mountains of concrete dust and broken brick. The shaking was felt far beyond the epicenter. In the capital city of Caracas, millions of residents experienced 60 full seconds of violent movement. The long duration of the shaking sent waves of panic through the population, driving people into the streets as glass showered down from high-rise buildings. The city's international airport suffered structural damage, halting all flights and cutting off the quickest route for incoming aid. Power grids failed across vast areas of the country, plunging entire cities into darkness. Along with the electricity, the mobile phone networks collapsed. This created a secondary crisis of silence. Families could not call their loved ones to find out if they were alive, and emergency responders were left blind, unable to coordinate rescue efforts in the areas that needed them most. The United States Geological Survey uses an automated system called PAGER, which stands for Prompt Assessment of Global Earthquakes for Response. Immediately after the double shock in Venezuela, the system calculated a terrifying 44% probability that the final death toll would fall between 10,000 and 100,000 people. It also calculated a 30% probability that the deaths could exceed 100,000. These numbers are difficult to comprehend, but they represent a grim reality. As the days went on, the official confirmed death toll climbed past 3,800 people, with more than 16,700 reported injuries. However, every expert monitoring the situation knows that these official numbers represent only a small fraction of the true loss. The local systems for tracking casualties were completely overwhelmed. Multiple databases designed to track missing persons estimated that the number of unaccounted people was actually between 31,000 and 50,000. The United Nations Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, stated publicly that more than 50,000 people remained missing in the disaster zone. A forensic pathologist working inside a makeshift facility in La Guaira spoke to journalists under the condition of anonymity, fearing retaliation from a government desperate to control the narrative. She revealed that the official figures did not even represent a third of the bodies they were actually recovering. Her facility alone was processing around 400 bodies every single day. The refrigerated trucks used to preserve the remains were completely full, forcing workers to stack body bags outside in the intense heat of the June sun. This human tragedy was made even worse by the fragile state of the country before the disaster even began. Venezuela was already experiencing a deep humanitarian crisis. Nearly 8 million people were already in need of basic aid before the ground ever started shaking. The healthcare system was already on the verge of collapse, with hospitals lacking basic medicines, clean water, and reliable electricity. When tens of thousands of severely injured people suddenly flooded into these clinics, there was simply nothing to treat them with. The country's political isolation made it incredibly difficult for international search and rescue teams to gain access and deploy their equipment. While the government initially acknowledged only a few hundred damaged buildings, satellite imagery analyzed by NASA painted a completely different picture. The space agency's radar maps showed that closer to 59,000 buildings, including crucial infrastructure like schools and hospitals, had been destroyed or severely compromised. The United Nations Development Program estimated the immediate economic damage at billions of dollars, with some assessments placing the total losses at $37 billion. That represents roughly 6% of the country's entire gross domestic product, completely wiped out in less than a minute. Behind these massive numbers are individual human stories of unspeakable grief. Across the globe, members of the Venezuelan diaspora watched in horror as social media feeds filled with images of collapsed neighborhoods. Families in places like Spain and Florida spent sleepless nights staring at their screens, holding up photographs of missing grandparents and begging for any information about specific buildings. In one heartbreaking case, a family tried desperately to find their elderly relatives who lived in a 7-story apartment building in the town of Carabaleta. When international rescue workers finally arrived at the site, they had to tell the family the brutal truth. The building had pancaked, and without heavy cranes to lift the massive concrete slabs, there was no way to search for survivors. This is the reality of what a major earthquake does to a community that has not been built to withstand it. It is why we must pay close attention to the science of seismic activity, because the Earth does not care about economic conditions or political boundaries. Before we cross the ocean to look at how another nation faced a similar monster with a completely different result, let us take a quick moment. If this deep dive into our shifting planet is opening your eyes, please consider supporting our work. You can do this by hitting the join button below or simply leaving a comment with your thoughts. Every single interaction helps us bring these vital stories to the world. While the world was watching the tragedy in Venezuela with a heavy heart, another major tectonic event occurred on the opposite side of the planet. On April 20th, 2026, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck off the Sanriku coast of northeastern Japan. The contrast between these two events is one of the most important lessons in modern science. Japan's own meteorological agency initially measured the quake at a magnitude of 7.7 before final assessment settled on 7.4. The shaking from this massive marine rupture was felt across a staggering geographic area. People experienced the ground moving from the northern island of Hokkaido all the way down to the central prefectures of the main island. In Tokyo, hundreds of kilometers away from the epicenter, high-rise buildings swayed slowly and relentlessly. A news producer reporting from the capital described the unsettling sensation of watching her office shake for approximately 7 full minutes. Immediately after the earthquake, Japanese authorities did not hesitate. They knew that a large earthquake off the coast could generate a deadly tsunami. Within minutes, the government issued a 3-meter tsunami warning. This warning covered Iwate Prefecture, as well as parts of Hokkaido and Aomori. Emergency evacuation orders were sent directly to the mobile phones of approximately 44,000 people in Hokkaido alone. Because they had practiced this exact scenario many times, the coastal residents did not panic. They calmly walked along designated evacuation routes to higher ground. A tsunami wave measuring 80 centimeters was observed hitting the port of Kuji in Iwate Prefecture. Fortunately, the wave did not cause major damage, and the warning was eventually downgraded to an advisory before being lifted entirely. When the final damage assessments were completed, the results were astonishing. There were roughly 200 minor power outages, 2 people suffered minor injuries from falling down, and there were 0 deaths. Not a single building collapsed. Think about that contrast for a moment. In Venezuela, a shallow magnitude 7.5 earthquake killed thousands of people, collapsed tens of thousands of homes, and caused billions of dollars in damage. In Japan, an almost identical geological event of magnitude 7.4 caused just 2 minor injuries and 0 deaths. This difference is not a matter of luck, and it is not because the earthquakes were fundamentally different in their physical strength. The difference is entirely due to the decisions made by human societies decades before the ground started shaking. Japan has built a society based on the absolute certainty that the earth will shake. They operate under some of the strictest seismic building codes in the world. These codes are not static. They are constantly revised and updated whenever new scientific data becomes available. In Japan, buildings are not designed to be rigid and unyielding. Instead, they are engineered to sway, bend, and absorb the energy of seismic waves without breaking. The country has invested billions of dollars in advanced base isolation technology. This technology involves placing giant shock absorbers made of layers of rubber and steel beneath the foundations of buildings. When the earth moves violently beneath a building, these shock absorbers deform and slide, preventing the destructive energy of the earthquake from traveling up into the structure itself. This is why Tokyo's skyscrapers could sway for 7 minutes without suffering any structural damage. Beyond the buildings, Japan has integrated seismic safety into its very infrastructure. Bullet trains are connected to a vast network of seismometers. The moment these sensors detect the very first harmless seismic wave of an earthquake, they automatically cut power to the trains. They apply the emergency brakes, bringing them to a safe stop before the violent shaking arrives. Hospital emergency rooms are built to remain fully operational, with backup generators and independent water supplies. And from the time they are in kindergarten, Japanese children participate in regular earthquake drills so that their physical response to danger becomes automatic. Following this April earthquake, Japanese authorities took an unprecedented step by issuing a formal megaquake advisory. This is a concept that is often misunderstood by the public. It is not an earthquake prediction, because science cannot predict exactly when or where an earthquake will strike. Instead, a megaquake advisory is a scientific statement of increased probability. In this specific case, geologists determined that the short-term probability of a massive earthquake of magnitude 8.0 or larger occurring along the Nankai Trough had temporarily increased. The weekly probability rose from its normal background rate of 0.1% to 1.0%. While 1% still sounds very small, it is actually 10 times higher than normal. The government did not want to cause panic, but they wanted people to be prepared. They urged residents across 182 towns in 7 different prefectures to review their evacuation routes. They were also told to make sure their emergency kits were ready. It was a calm, systematic reminder of the geological reality of their home. To understand why Japan takes these precautions so seriously, we have to look at its unique plate tectonics. Japan sits at the chaotic convergence point of 4 major tectonic plates: the Pacific Plate, the North American Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the Philippine Sea Plate. Because of this complex intersection, Japan accounts for approximately 10% of all the seismic energy released on Earth each year. About 20% of all global earthquakes with a magnitude of 6.0 or higher occur in this relatively small area. The country experiences an average of 1,500 felt earthquakes every single year. It is a nation that literally lives on top of a restless machine. The April 2026 earthquake occurred along the Japan Trench, which is the exact same tectonic boundary that produced the catastrophic Tohoku earthquake of 2011. That magnitude 9.1 event was the 4th strongest earthquake ever recorded in human history. The resulting tsunami killed nearly 20,000 people and triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. By studying that tragedy, Japan learned how to survive the next one. They proved to the world that while we cannot control the movements of the Earth, we can choose whether those movements result in a tragedy or a manageable event. Now, let us turn our focus to California, because what scientists have recently discovered about the Golden State is causing alarm. In June of 2026, a team of researchers led by Dr. Lillian Burkhardt at the University of Bern in Switzerland published a groundbreaking study. This study was published in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Solid Earth. Their conclusion was direct, clear, and deeply concerning. They found that the San Andreas Fault system in Southern California has now reached its highest level of physical stress in the past 1,000 years. To understand why this is so dangerous, we have to understand how faults accumulate energy over time. Tectonic plates are massive, rigid slabs of rock that are constantly moving. The Pacific Plate is trying to slide northwest past the North American Plate, but because the rock along the boundary is rough and uneven, the two plates cannot slide smoothly. Instead, they get locked together by friction. Even though the boundary is locked, the deeper parts of the plates continue to move, sliding at a rate of about 5 centimeters every year. Because the surface is locked, the rock along the fault begins to bend and deform, storing this movement as elastic strain. Think of it like bending a wooden ruler. The more you bend it, the more energy is stored inside the wood. Eventually, the force of the bend will exceed the strength of the wood, and the ruler will violently snap. That is what happens during an earthquake. The longer a fault remains locked without releasing its stress, the more energy it stores, and the larger the eventual earthquake will be when the rock finally snaps. The southern section of the San Andreas Fault has not experienced a major surface rupturing earthquake since the year 1857. That was the Fort Tejon earthquake, which had an estimated magnitude of 7.9. That was more than 169 years ago. For over a century and a half, the plates have been grinding against each other, loading energy into the crust without a significant release. Dr. Burkhardt's team wanted to know exactly how much stress has accumulated in this system. To do this, they built a sophisticated four-dimensional computer model that simulated 1,000 years of earthquake history. This history included both the San Andreas Fault and the neighboring San Jacinto Fault. They populated this model with a massive amount of real-world data, including radiocarbon dating of displaced soil layers. They also used historical records of past ground ruptures and tree ring data that documented ancient earthquakes. When they ran this simulation forward to the present day, the results were striking. The model showed that the physical stress on multiple segments of both fault systems is currently at or above the highest levels ever observed. The system is not simply approaching a dangerous limit. According to the data, it has already crossed it. But the study revealed an even more complex threat. The researchers looked closely at a geographical area called the Cajon Pass. Cajon Pass is located about 50 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. This is the precise location where the San Andreas Fault and the San Jacinto Fault run incredibly close to each other. The model showed that this junction can act as a geological gateway. Under the right conditions, a rupture that starts on one fault can actually jump across the Cajon Pass and trigger a rupture on the other fault. This means that instead of having a single earthquake on one fault line, we could see a simultaneous multi-fault rupture. A joint rupture of this kind could easily produce an earthquake with a magnitude between 7.4 and 7.8. Instead of affecting a narrow corridor, a multi-fault earthquake would simultaneously devastate the Los Angeles Basin, San Bernardino, Riverside, and the Coachella Valley. If you are finding value in this investigation and want to support independent, research-driven storytelling, please subscribe. Please take 2 seconds to tap the bell icon after subscribing to stay updated on our latest videos. Sharing this video on your social platforms is the single best way to help others understand the silent threat beneath our feet. Seismologists like Dr. Ahmed Elbana, the director of the statewide California Earthquake Center, have warned about the accumulated stress. He stated that the stress along these faults is now so high that the earthquake gate is effectively unlocked. The physical conditions necessary for a joint rupture are fully present. When asked when this massive event might occur, his answer was simple and sobering. It could happen today, tomorrow, next week, or 30 years from now. On the scale of geological time, there is no difference between those options. But for the 13 million people who live in the metropolitan area of Los Angeles, the difference is everything. The geology of the Los Angeles basin makes it highly vulnerable to seismic waves. Much of the city is built on deep, soft river sediments. When seismic waves travel from hard rock into these soft soils, they slow down. They increase in amplitude, much like an ocean wave growing larger as it approaches the shore. This amplification can cause buildings to shake far more violently than they would on solid rock. Southern California has thousands of older concrete and soft-story apartment buildings that were constructed in the 1960s and 1970s. These buildings are known to be highly vulnerable to collapse during major shaking. In addition, crucial infrastructure like water pipelines, natural gas mains, and major electrical transmission lines all cross the active traces of these faults. A joint rupture on both systems would likely cause immediate, widespread fires as gas lines rupture. At the same time, broken water mains would leave firefighters without the water needed to battle the blazes. Major freeways and rail lines that connect Southern California to the rest of the country would be severed. This would make it incredibly difficult to bring in emergency supplies and medical aid. The message from the scientific community is clear. A massive, multi-fault earthquake in Southern California is not a distant worst-case scenario. It is a realistic physical probability that we must prepare for right now. To put this risk into perspective, we can look at another historic city that sits on a ticking geological time bomb, Istanbul, Turkey. This is a city of over 16 million people, and it is located just 20 kilometers north of the active North Anatolian Fault. The North Anatolian Fault is a strike-slip system that behaves in a remarkably similar way to the San Andreas Fault in California. During the 20th century, this fault produced a series of major earthquakes that exhibited a terrifying pattern. The ruptures began in the far east of Turkey and systematically marched westward over the decades. Each earthquake loaded stress onto the next segment of the fault to the west. In 1999, this progression reached the city of Izmit, where a magnitude 7.6 earthquake killed over 17,000 people. The very next segment of the fault in this deadly sequence is the segment that lies directly beneath the Marmara Sea, just south of Istanbul. This locked section of the fault has not produced a major earthquake since the year 1766. For over 250 years, this segment has been locked, accumulating stress as the tectonic plates try to slide past each other. Scientists at the German Research Center for Geosciences have calculated that the slip deficit along this locked segment is now about 4.7 meters. This means that when the fault finally ruptures, the two sides of the plate will violently slide past each other by nearly 15 feet in a matter of seconds. In April of 2025, a moderate magnitude 6.2 earthquake occurred beneath the Marmara Sea. While it did not cause any structural collapses, the shaking was strong enough to send over 350 people to hospitals. People ran screaming into the streets in the middle of the night, terrified that the long-dreaded big one had finally arrived. Seismologists estimate that there is a 47% probability of a magnitude 7.3 or larger earthquake striking directly beneath Istanbul. This event is likely to happen within the next 30 years. That is essentially a coin flip, and the clock is ticking. Like Venezuela, Istanbul faces major challenges with its building stock. While the city has made efforts to implement seismic retrofitting programs, the sheer scale of the task is overwhelming. There are hundreds of thousands of older, unreinforced concrete buildings in the city that do not meet modern seismic safety standards. The density of the city's population and its narrow streets would make rescue efforts incredibly difficult if a major collapse occurred. Istanbul is a powerful reminder that seismic risk is a global challenge, and the vulnerability of our cities is growing. When we see news of earthquakes happening in close succession, such as a magnitude 6.5 in the Philippines, our natural instinct is to wonder. We see a series of strong tremors in Papua New Guinea and a magnitude 5.2 in Nicaragua, and feel like something strange is happening. It is easy to feel like something strange and unnatural is happening to our planet. But when we consult the global seismic data, the scientific reality is reassuring. The Earth is not experiencing an unusual increase in seismic activity. On any given day, our planet experiences thousands of earthquakes. The vast majority of these are so small that they can only be detected by highly sensitive scientific instruments. Earthquakes of magnitude 6.0 or larger occur roughly 120 to 140 times every single year. That averages out to about one major earthquake every 3 days somewhere on Earth. When several of these events happen to occur in the same week, it is simply a statistical coincidence, not a sign of a global geological chain reaction. The tectonic plate boundary that caused the disaster in Venezuela is completely independent of the plate boundary that produced the earthquake in Japan. They are separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean and crust, and they do not communicate with each other. What these events do show us is the constant, restless movement of the Pacific Ring of Fire. This is a vast, 40,000-kilometer, horseshoe-shaped arc of tectonic boundaries that encircles the Pacific Ocean. The Ring of Fire is home to roughly 90% of all the world's earthquakes and 75% of its active volcanoes. Countries like Japan, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and the western coast of the Americas all sit directly along this active arc. The geology of this region has not changed. What has changed is the size of the human footprint. Over the last 70 years, the global population has grown rapidly, and much of that growth has occurred in massive megacities. Many of these cities are located directly inside active fault zones. Cities like Tokyo, Los Angeles, Istanbul, and Manila are home to millions. The critical question we must ask is not whether these cities will be shaken, but how prepared they will be when the shaking begins. One of the most promising advancements in seismic safety is the development of early warning systems. While we cannot predict earthquakes days or hours in advance, we can use the physics of the earthquakes themselves to give warning. When a fault ruptures, it releases two primary types of seismic waves. The first wave is the P wave, or primary wave. These are compressional waves that travel very quickly through the Earth's crust. P waves do not carry a lot of energy, and they do not cause destructive shaking. They are followed by the S wave, or secondary wave. S waves travel much slower than P waves, but they carry the violent shearing energy that causes buildings to shake and collapse. Early warning systems work by placing highly sensitive sensors directly along active fault lines. When a rupture begins, these sensors detect the fast-moving, harmless P waves instantly. The system then uses fiber optic networks and radio waves to transmit a digital alert to nearby cities at the speed of light. Because digital signals travel faster than seismic waves, the alert can arrive at a city before the destructive S waves reach the surface. This tiny window of time can save countless lives. 10 seconds of warning is enough time for people to drop, cover, and hold on. It is enough time for high-speed trains to begin braking, preventing catastrophic derailments. It is enough time for surgeons to pause delicate medical procedures, for elevators to stop at the nearest floor and open their doors. It is enough time for automated valves to shut off natural gas pipelines, preventing major fires. Japan's early warning system has been operational since 2007, and it proved its worth during multiple disasters. In California, the Shake Alert system is now active statewide, sending warning messages directly to residents' mobile phones. But early warning systems can only do so much. They are a tool, not a shield. The true defense against seismic disasters lies in our homes, our communities, and our infrastructure. While we cannot easily retrofit an entire city overnight, there are simple, practical steps that each of us can take. If you live in an earthquake-prone area, you should ensure that your home has a basic emergency supply kit. This kit should contain at least 72 hours of fresh water, non-perishable food, and a first aid kit. Include flashlights, essential medications, and copies of important documents. You should know exactly where your home's main gas shutoff valve is located and how to close it. You should secure heavy furniture, like bookshelves and wardrobes, to the walls so they cannot tip over during shaking. You should also establish a clear communication plan with your family, choosing a designated meeting place. These small actions take only a few hours to complete, but they can make all the difference when a disaster strikes. Our planet has been moving, shifting, and releasing seismic energy for 4.5 billion years. It will continue to do so long after we are gone. Earthquakes are not a punishment, and they are not a sign of a dying world. They are simply the physical evidence of a living, dynamic planet. We cannot stop the plates from moving, and we cannot prevent the faults from slipping. But we can choose how we respond. The tragedy in Venezuela showed us the terrible cost of neglect, poverty, and unpreparedness. The survival of Japan showed us what is possible when a society embraces science and invests in resilient engineering. California and Istanbul represent the next great tests of our collective wisdom. The science is clear, the stress is building, and the clock is ticking. What happens when the ground inevitably moves next will depend entirely on the choices we make today.